Oh, there it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, it's really loud today. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Bloomington Rotary Club Celebration of Service Weekly. And I just realized I'd forgot to hit the bell, I think, the last two times to start the meeting. So, you leave the country for 5 months and you forget what you're supposed to do. It happens. So for those who can, please silence your electronic devices. And with that, let's go to the first. Oh, I have the controller here. I can do this. There we go. So with our who's heard of Shetland, United Kingdom? Anyone? Okay. You've been there? All right. Well, that is our Where in the World is the Rotary Club today. Shetland is a club. Its nearest club is 129 kilometers away. And by the way, there is a series called Shetland that's actually quite good that I highly recommend on Acorn TV if you have it. But they have it's a very small island at the very northern point out of Scotland. They have residents of the island do not travel a lot, and there's not many people on the island. They have about, I think it's 7,000 people. So they have a club membership of, I think it was 17. And what they do is they set up a market every weekend to tell people about Rotary. And that's how they help support local charities at the markets. So again, in the spirit of understanding how different clubs act differently across the world, that's how they act in Shetland. And by the way, if you ever get the chance to visit it, it's a pretty cool place. Yeah, you were just there, I think. So from a birthdays standpoint, actually before birthdays, we are going to have Michelle Cohen do the reflection. I just want to give a shout out to Michelle. We didn't have anyone sign up for the reflection. And Michelle said, you know what, I'll do it. So thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Rotary magazine. If you haven't read it yet, the article I am going to share with you highlights someone here in Bloomington. So if you want to check it out for yourselves, the article is called Lifequakes, and it talks about dealing with difficult issues and, surrounding yourself with folks that can help you get through rough times. So I was meandering through this, reading through it, and I will just go ahead and share this with you. So this portion is talking about purpose and how that helps people get through difficult times. For many years, community service had been a part of Gabe Glodden's life. He'd been an AmeriCorps member, and he even got his master's degree in nonprofit management. But when he married and had kids, his priorities shifted. He didn't feel like he had extra time to give. Parenthood, after all, can feel like its own lifequake. Then he went through a divorce. As he and his 2 young children rebuilt their lives together, Glodden was feeling unmoored, disconnected from the community around him. In therapy, he began to understand that he had an opportunity to shift his focus to activities that were important to him. Around that same time, a colleague asked if he'd be interested in joining a non-traditional Rotary club she was starting for families. The Family Service Satellite Club of the Rotary Club of Bloomington Sunrise in Indiana would meet monthly for service projects that kids and parents participate in together. Glodden was energized by the idea. I could engage my children around the value of service, he says. And I also saw this as an opportunity for us to have a social experience outside of the house. Since 2024, Rock, who is 10, and Beatrice, 11, have helped fill book bags with food for kids, sorted items at food pantries, weeded gardens, and served as extras in a movie made by an arts organization. They've also gotten to know the other like-minded families in the club who are committed to making Bloomington a better place. Glodden says that by participating regularly in something that's bigger than themselves, all 3 have grown. Service is not just about the action and the outcome you expect to have with the organization you're volunteering for, he says. It's also about the change that takes place in the volunteer. So if you know Gabe, just, tell him he's famous. And I also wanted to share, because that talks about community service. Diana Hoffman and I are the community service co-chairs, and we're going to have our first meeting after the August 25th regular meeting. So if you're already on the committee, please stay after. If you're not and want to come join us, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. What a great reminder for our children to remind them how important community service is. So thank you for sharing that. Lynn Schwartzberg apparently was the smart one and picked today to read the guests. We have no guests, so Lynn can just enjoy her meal. Was there anyone online, Leslie? Nope, no guests online. Okay, but we have a full house, so I'm very excited about that, to see all the faces that are out there. From a birthday standpoint, we have a pretty light sheet today. We have Lauren Snyder, his birthday's the 9th. And then Megan Neese for anniversaries has been with us for 10 years. And then for announcements, we have quite a few announcements. I wanted to quote Winston Churchill: "Perseverance. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop." And I share this because I want to acknowledge Mark Peterson. How many of you got the announcement about the credit card capability? Woo, let's hear it. We have been talking about getting that capability on our system for 3 years that I've been here. So Mark, thank you for the perseverance. Thank you for getting it, and looking forward to being able to pay on it, and being able to pay on it through the Ignite app. All right. Then I also wanted to share that August's monthly theme is membership and new club development. And we've already started with last week having an induction. We'll have another induction next week. So as you look around and are talking to neighbors and friends, if there's someone that you think would be a great member, please bring them. Next announcement, fellow Rotarian James Wolf is recovering from a stroke. He has had 2 nasty falls as well. We will be sending him a card. Obviously, here is his phone number, or you can look it up in Ignite, your Ignite app. But I'm sure he would appreciate any well-wishing and calls. And then lastly, on a more uplifting note, we did get approval for the district grant. It is funded. Good job. Tina Swanson, Kyla Cox-Deckard, and Sarah Laughlin will be the planning committee to work with the community kitchen on how we spend the $6 grand, the 3,000 that we match, and then the 3,000 from the district grant. So great job. We all know that that's very important, and that's a good reminder to buy tickets for the toast. That is how we get the money that we raise for the grants. So everybody, toast tickets are for sale. And let me make sure. A couple other announcements that actually get their own slide. Just a reminder, polio, we're seeing, I look at these, I get these weekly. Still the numbers are low, which is great, but obviously with some of the USAID funding that was pulled, it's so critical that thank you, Tyler. It's so critical that we continue to support, because Rotary and the Gates Foundation are really the ones that drive the reduction in polio cases that we've seen internationally. And Afghanistan and Pakistan continue to be the ones that seem to be problematic from a polio standpoint. And then lastly, so I saw, I don't know where I got the announcement, but it was on Instagram, posting about Whitney. Our own Whitney Cordoba Grueso is a SMDP Biotech Scholar. She got an award, which is phenomenal. And then today, I found out that her family has actually been very adversely, in her town, I should say, adversely affected with the earthquake in Colombia. So it's caused serious damage to her hometown. There's been, I believe, about 224 deaths as a result of that earthquake at this point. There's Red Cross taking donations. There's Save the Children taking donations. So any opportunity, while we celebrate on the one side, let's keep her in your prayers on the other side. All right. And I think that was it for the announcements. Next, we have happy dollars. Do we have any happy people? And Michael will come. Do we have any happy dollars? We've got Sarah. And while he's getting all set up, I will just share, I'll do a $20 happy dollars. We just got back, as you know, I wasn't here last week. We went to internship with our son to see him in Denver. And he has decided, now this could change, but he has decided that he believes he's going to get a job offer. I said, well, when it's there, we'll talk. But he loves Denver, and I suspect he's going to be living there, and he's just so happy and doing well. So it was really heartwarming to see that. So I'll share that. And Sarah?
I've got $20 for Teachers Warehouse, probably my last $20 because I just bought a house. It's in Hoosier Acres and it needs a spot of work. So I met with Lauren Wood this morning. It's probably going to be a year before I move. But anyway, it's very exciting. It's 0.75 acres compared to the 9 I have now, and 2,500 square feet compared to the 4,000 I have now. So I think it's going to be actually, maybe after next year, I will have money.
Downside.
So I have $5 happy because we had a great beach bash event on Saturday. The weather cooperated and the Lake Monroe Water Fund raised the money we needed to. So thanks people who came out and showed up.
I have 10 happy dollars because I'm almost through with the set, but I do have my overalls on, so I am going back to finish it. You do have on your table a little sweet treat, which is chocolate mousse is always so kind. Besides, riding herd over the Taste of Bloomington, they'll do this for the various nonprofits. If you go there on the 18th and tell them you are there on behalf of Off Night, they will give 20% of whatever you spend to Off Night for the next shows. So we really appreciate you coming out. There's information about the next show. It opens on Sunday, but we're already sold out on Sunday. So if you are getting tickets, get them soon because we've kind of been known to run out.
Awesome.
I want to contribute $21 for Happy Dollars, and that 21 is very meaningful. I just returned from the 4-day second annual, my maiden name is Mulville Family Reunion, hosted by my daughter, which was meaning me too. And we had 21 attending. These are my brothers, sisters, their children, and now the next set of generation. So 21 of us, and we all had our numbers on our back, our different numbers.
I'm happy we're leaving for California this evening to go to Monterey Car Week, which is one of my partner's bucket list activities, and I can look at cars.
I'm happy and offering $20 because my daughter Rachel has just moved to Bloomington, and there's a lot that's unsettled, but she's here.
That's awesome. And while he's walking over to Ellen, anybody online, Leslie?
No, we're pretty stingy and not unhappy over here.
I was so happy I had a chance to be in Wisconsin for quite a while and see all my wonderful friends there who have been in many things that I had participated in. And I would like to contribute $20 for the safety and the wonderful time I had and the wonderful time they all had. And we attended Rotary right away that same time. And so that was wonderful. So thank you so much always for allowing us to have these opportunities in America where we have the freedom.
Awesome. All right. Lots of happy people. That's great. One quick announcement. Somebody left a parking ticket. We'll put it up front. So if you're missing your parking ticket, that will be up front. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Richardson to introduce our guest today.
So good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Konstantin Dierks to our club today. Let me give you a little background about Konstantin. He's an associate professor in the Department of History at IU. I'm a history undergrad major. He arrived in Bloomington and IU in August of 2001. His first book was on letter writing and communications in early America, and actually one of the chapters in the book focuses specifically on the American Revolution. His current research focuses on globalization of the United States between American Revolution and the American Civil War. And there are many Americans venturing not just west across North America, but all over the world during that time period. And you'll learn more about that. Served as consultant for the Declaration of Independence, The Motives, The Moment, a fantastic exhibition currently on view at the Lilly Library. And it's there till December. And I've been there twice, and I learned as much the second visit as I did the first. It's really, really well done. He's teaching a special class on 1776 and the Declaration of Independence this fall semester. I also got to see Konstantin firsthand. So I'm not winging it by having him here as a fellow history person, but he gave a compelling arts and sciences hosted presentation related to an exhibit by Jack Wicks, Steve's brother, entitled Returning to the World, Vietnam Veterans' Journeys. And these were reflections from veterans in central Indiana after 50 years. An interesting and entertaining IU Mini University class on the American Revolution that included numerous questions from the students when I was one of those students. No quizzes, no exams, great program. And remember that for a second, because I'm going to come back to the questions part. I want to add too that I learned this morning, I knew that Konstantin had a couple kids, but there are some highlights from the summer. One of them is in marching band, already starting, plays the flute and is very excited. But the other, this is really important to me, learned how to drive a stick shift, because I've been often solicited to drive the stick shift because no one else knows how to. So that's a major development, especially for kids this age. Finally, this is going to be a relatively short presentation. And the good news is that means we're going to have more time for questions. And what I noticed at Mini University was one of the most engaging presentations, because a lot of people had a lot of questions, and there's not one question that Konstantin couldn't answer. So please start thinking about questions you might have. And with that, I welcome Konstantin to the stage.
Thank you. Okay, I'm a mobile person, so I'm going to try to stay, not move around too much. But thank you so much for the invitation to come speak with you today. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me originally. I'm really, really glad to talk about the Declaration in 1776 and this 250th anniversary year to as many people as possible. I was very involved in the exhibition at the Lilly Library. I encourage all of you to go there. I'm very, very grateful that people are interested in what I'll call archival research-based history, given that it is under considerable pressure in this historic moment. And I certainly feel that if you really look at history in an honest and complete way, that has an empowering function that empowers you to understand the past better and empowers you to build a better future at the same time. So I'm very, very committed to research. It's what I've been doing all summer. There are so many new books about the Declaration being written right now because of the 250th anniversary, so I'm reading constantly. I'm going to the Monroe County Public Library. It has a great collection that I hope you enjoy, and they have new books every week now about the Declaration in 1776. So there's so much material now being thought about. If you read the Times this morning, the New York Times, that is, sorry, there was an article about AI founding fathers that are being produced, so you could listen to interviews with the founding fathers, which is rather crazy, and what is put in the mouths of the founding fathers. But anyway, it sort of appears everywhere in our culture. The title of what I want to do today is about the trying times of the Declaration of Independence. And if you remember your Thomas Paine, of course, in December, he writes the American Crisis. He starts writing a serial publication the American crisis. And these are the times that tribe men souls is one of the famous quotes from that at the end of a very, very difficult and challenging year. And I'd like to project that to help us better understand what happens at the time of the Declaration of Independence itself in May, June, and July 1776, because there's people involved in that moment from the Continental Congress were confronted with a lot of challenges. And we sort of have a very sacralized view of the Declaration. It's a wonderful, wonderful document, which you can see in the Lilly Library, the Dunlap broadside, the first printing, very, very rare copy in the world and certainly in this part of the world. And it's a beautiful document, but the document doesn't really contain its own context, which is why the exhibition tries to do that a little bit. And I'm going to hopefully do that a little more intensely today to help you appreciate what kind of commitment was involved and what kind of work was involved in creating the Declaration of Independence. But my first question to you is actually, I'm going to do something that I often do, which is, what do you remember of the Declaration of Independence? I'm going to pause. I'm going to have time pressures, unfortunately. I know you want to be short, but I'd like you to actually talk among yourselves for a moment. What do you remember? What do you remember from the Declaration of Independence? If you haven't looked at it in a while, what do you remember from it? So I'm going to. This is for you for a moment. One moment. What do you remember from the Declaration of Independence? From the audience, so I should be ready. No, not now, but it's going to take too much time. Thank you. All right, people. Time is up. Because I'm doing an entire semester. I'm doing a course in 1776 in the Declaration of Independence. I get 16 weeks to do that. I'm going to have lots of special lectures, but I really have 15 minutes today. So your time is up. But how many people said, who knows, we hold these truths to be self-evident? Anyone remember that from the Declaration? All right, pretty good. How many people remember all men are created equal? You're a woman, you remember that too? It's strangely not, okay, even though you're not included. Sorry. So these are the classic things in the Declaration of Independence, right? These are the things we remember, et cetera, et cetera. And this is from the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. And at the time, one of my favorite documents in the Lilly Library exhibit is John Lind, who was a writer for the British government, and he was hired to write a response to the Declaration of Independence. And it's one of the great books. It's 20-something pages long, and it's about why the Declaration of Independence is all wrong from beginning to end. But the things that you remember, all men are created equal, we hold these truths to be self-evident, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? These are the classic phrases. John Lind looked at that and he said, that's all just nonsense. I'm not even going to bother with that nonsense. I'm going to talk about the important part of the Declaration of Independence, and that's the grievances. How many people remember grievance 14? 10? 21? Right? But that was what he felt. The king is being insulted by the Declaration of Independence, and it's the grievances that are the part that need refutation because they were all false accusations against the king. And if you look at the document, the Dunlap broadside, it's the grievances that occupy the most space. And that's what occupied the most attention at the time in newspapers, with the British government, et cetera, et cetera. That's the part that was reprinted most often. The preamble, the words that have become sacred for us, right? All men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, et cetera, et cetera. those words became much more important in the 19th century when you had abolitionists fighting slavery, when you had women's rights activists fighting against the exclusion of women, et cetera, et cetera. And those were the words that were plucked out and given meaning after in the 1830s and 1840s and beyond and into the 20th century and Martin Luther King, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in 1776, those words were the least important, and they were the least often reprinted in newspapers at the time. It was the grievances that commanded attention. And so I want to think about the Declaration in a more complicated way and really bring you back into the atmosphere of how the Declaration was written by this collection of upstanding men, the 56 men, the quote-unquote signers. Some of those men who were there on July 4th didn't sign the document. Some of the people signed the document who weren't there on July 4th, of course. So the signers is mystification, a little bit of the process of how the document was created. But I'd like to steep us into May and June and July for a little bit, just so you can appreciate sort of not this document and the words that it has, including the grievances, but how the document was produced and put into the future, and the future that was unexpected for people at the time, which again, as the preamble has carried so much meaning since then. So I'm going to refer, I'm going to run out of time, I can tell already. So the Declaration has 1,337 words in it. I'm going to actually spend much more time in something else, which is a lot more words, and that's the Journals of the Continental Congress. And I want to look at this from the inside of the Congress, the inside of the people who were there, who considered the document, wrote the document, et cetera, and dealt with the document, and look at it from their vantage point, looking out. And there we have a lot. There are 26 volumes or more of the Journals of the Continental Congress. There are several for 1776. There are a lot of words, and there are a lot of things that happened in that time period. So I want to emphasize 5 of them to see, so you can see the pressures that were on people in this moment, all the things that were bombarding them from the outside to deal with all the issues that they had to deal with, which included for a couple of days the Declaration of Independence. There was so much that happened before and so much that happened afterward. So one of the things that happened, number one, is just state building. And I don't mean state building in a more general way of building a government. And one of the first things that it was an intense project in May of 1776 was to build, there was 13 colonies, they weren't states. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, it says the United States of America. There were only 4 states actually on July 4th, 1776. 8 of them were, the rest were still colonies. They were not states. But they were being asked in May 10th and May 15th, they were being asked to say these colonial governments where most of the royal governors had been vanished from the scene, shall we say, but they had no governance. They were all illegally meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you create legitimacy for these colonial governments that had no legitimacy at all? And they were all encouraged to write constitutions. And this became an important project. This is what Thomas Jefferson wanted to be doing. Instead of writing the Declaration of Independence, he wanted to go back to Virginia and write the Virginia State Constitution, because that was the important thing to do in his mind. And this is what each of the colonies did in this time period, is write constitutions and to try to create legitimacy for who they were, right? Because you are a legitimate organization, you probably have a constitution and bylaws, right? Et cetera, et cetera. That's an important part to create your legitimacy. These people did not have legitimacy. The Continental Congress had no legitimacy. They were all meeting, as far as the British government was concerned, illegally. And so this was one enormous project at the time. And these constitutions, we have a constitution that's lasted for a long time. The constitutions that were written, if you look at their history, and I won't go through this, did not last. They wrote a constitution that was all experimental. They made so many mistakes, and they revised them within a few years. They all realized how they didn't work out very well, and they needed revision and revision. And if you look at, obviously, the history of the Indiana State Constitution in the 19th century, revision after revision after revision. So there's a lot of instability and a lot of experimentation, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of not knowing what they were doing, and that's in all of this process. And this is true if you look at the resolution for the Declaration of Independence. It happens at the same time as some other really important things. One is to have an Articles of a Confederation. What is the relationship going to be between Virginia and South Carolina and Pennsylvania? They had no idea. Continental Congress was meeting, they had no idea. So they needed to produce an Articles of Confederation, which later on will turn into a constitution to join things. But at that point, it was completely fragmented. And again, they had no idea what they were doing. they were asked at the same time also to develop a model treaty, to have some kind of relationship with other parts of the world, especially parts of the world they were asking for money and munitions from. And they had no idea, again, how to do that. So this was one of the tasks of this time period. And just to appreciate, I don't know how many committees do you have? Do you have committees? Do you have anyone serving on a committee? So these people were serving on multiple committees. In the Continental Congress in 1776, there are 233 committees. 233, and some people served on many of those committees, like Thomas Jefferson. And this is the project. These are the kinds of things they were confronted with. And so the Declaration of Independence happens in 2 days, but afterward is when the draft of the Articles of Confederation come, and those debates happen. Afterward is the debates about the model treaty, for instance. And so the work continues, and fundamental work. And I'm just going to select those couple of things for that moment. And so we have the 2 days in which the declaration was done, and all you know, like on July 1st, it was a vote of 9 to 2 to 2, and it took a couple of more days to have it be 12-0-0 or 12-0-1. New York did not say yes to the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. They had to wait a few more days, but they didn't have permission to do so. But even at the last minute, there was a lot of work to be done. And I hope some of you have seen the wonderful musical 1776. Anyone seen, right? Which is just a delightful, campy version of all this, but at least you can appreciate like the sort of the intensity of the moment and the humanness of the people. These were all flawed people. And this is one of the famous things that John Adams says later on, 1811, he writes to a younger nephew and he says, we didn't really know what we were doing back then. We were imperfect people, we were human beings, and we've been turned into people who are the founders and the fathers of the country. But at the time, we were just trying to figure everything out. And I want to immerse you in that without, I'm not gonna be able to go too far. But I want to take you to Canada. And I really wanted to immerse you in lots of dates, but I won't be able to do so. But I'll give you a couple of examples. In Canada, things went horribly wrong. If you know about, they tried to take Quebec from the British government in December 1775. It went horribly wrong. They imagined that the people in Canada would come and embrace them and side against the British government there, and they did not. And so the plans went horribly wrong, and then they had to figure out why did the plans go horribly wrong. So they start appointing committees. The first committee is appointed in February 1776, actually, and it's just to go up to upstate New York and Montreal. They still took possession of Montreal and figure out what went horribly wrong. This is one thing. Benjamin Franklin leaves the Continental Congress and goes up there, and they try to figure out what does things look like there, right? They don't even know what things look like. Then a couple days later, they appoint another committee, not the committee that's going to do the work, but the committee that's going to write the instructions to the committee that's going to do the work. That's another committee, et cetera, et cetera. So this process keeps on going, committee after committee after committee. The committees come back. Then there's another committee that forms because there was supposed to be a prisoner exchange. The prisoner exchange goes horribly wrong. There's another committee that's formed to figure out what happened with the prisoner exchange, and Thomas Jefferson is on that committee. That's in June of 1776 while he's writing the Declaration of Independence, for instance. And this process continues going on and on and on. What went wrong with Canada on these multiple levels? And there are multiple committees. They're meeting in June, et cetera, and July, all around the Declaration of Independence and all the busyness of the Congress in this time period. Well, now I'm hastening because I want to take you to not the north, but to the west. But there's a long Declaration of Independence there. And here, just to give you an example, May 25th, 1776, a group of emissaries arrived from the Iroquois, 6 nations, and they want to come into Congress and see what goes on in Congress. And they arrive on the 25th, and this is this is in the middle of the discussions of things. And they're invited to Congress. They attend Congress a couple of times. In the meanwhile, Congress is being asked in the South, the Cherokees are very, very displeased by land being taken away from them. And so there's a war between South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia against the Cherokees. And again, this is presented to the Congress, and the Congress says, well, we're sort of busy over here, but you are allowed to go, just do what you have to do to take care of that problem. And so again, this is under discussion. The Cherokees are not there, they're under discussion. The Iroquois are there. in Philadelphia, meeting with members of Congress for several weeks, et cetera, et cetera. And this is a lot of what's happening. If you look at the Journals of Continental Congress, again, this is a lot of what they're working on and thinking about and doing, which is to figure out what they call frontier defense, where the British are trying to lure native nations to side with them, and how do you respond to the situation? So there's a lot of diplomacy that faces that way. So that's facing west. Then, in June of 1776, again, right before the Declaration of Independence, William Howe arrives and Richard Howe arrives. William is a military general and his brother is a Navy admiral, and they are arriving as peace commissioners. And they are trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement with the people who are causing trouble in the colonies. And so this process also starts and becomes an intense one. In this time period in June and July, they're writing letters, staying friends with Benjamin Franklin when Franklin was in London. So they're writing to him, they're writing to George Washington, and they write a letter to George Washington, and they don't address it in a respectful manner. And George Washington refuses to see the letter. He doesn't even accept the letter because it's addressed to him as a private individual, not as his title as commander of the Continental Army, et cetera, et cetera. So he refuses the letter. And there's the Continental Congress actually expresses his thanks to George Washington for upholding the dignity of the rebels, and I'll call them rebels right now, upholding their dignity by refusing this letter that was simply tried to privatize them. And this is what the peace commissioners do over and over and over. They try to privatize the situation and try to meet with people individually because they refuse to acknowledge that the Continental Congress exists. Whatever the Continental Congress is, it's an organization, it's an institution, it's somewhere in between. And the peace commissioners don't want to acknowledge that this is something that has solidity. And of course, they want to have solidity. So this goes on back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in this time period. And I won't bury you into that because I want to take you to some other places. And I'm leaving something, so I've taken you into the Continental Congress and all the things that they were doing in May and June and July 1776. And I'll give you a couple of examples, just Canada being one of them. And again, there's so much in there about Canada, 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 Canada. There's so much about Native nations at this time period. There's so much about the peace commissioners, but I'm leaving something major out. Any of you watch Ken Burns' documentary? What major thing am I leaving out that's happening right now in May and June and July 1776? Anyone remember from Ken Burns? The British are coming. And the British have assembled a vast, vast navy. They know this is coming. It is spotted at the end of June. The fact that this massive, massive fleet is coming. The fleet is becomes so large, it's in 3 stages, but it's so large that it's large. The number of soldiers that are coming are larger than the population of New York City, or larger than the population of the largest city in this part of the world, which is Philadelphia. It's 400-something ships. It's 30-something thousand troops that are arriving, and they are panicking. And so if you look at what they're thinking about that the British are about to come with the most remarkable military operation that the world has ever seen on a scale. Just the descriptions of just the ships standing outside Staten Island and the loading of the troops that go into Staten Island, which happens July 2nd, is rather extraordinary. And they know all this is happening. They get reports on all of this. Their ships are sighted, and they are trying to prepare all of the military operations in this time period. So much of their time is spent on this as well. And of course, you know, these are the times that try men's souls are going to continue, because these are the military disasters that are about to happen as the British take New York City and move into New Jersey, and the Continental Congress by December has to flee Philadelphia and go to Baltimore for safety. So this is what Thomas Paine is writing about. But this all starts, I just want to appreciate the Declaration of Independence is only one task out of many, many tasks and many, many pressures that these men in that room were trying to figure out what to do. And they struggled to figure that out because they were, again, under so much pressure from so many different angles. And it's that part, if you look at the Declaration in Dunlap Broadside, it's a beautiful, beautiful document, but it doesn't help you appreciate the context and the atmosphere and the pressure in which it was created. And the only way to do that is if you look at other documents like the Journals of Congress, and you can feel how those words appeared in this sacred document, which I've gone to see like 8 times already. And it's just an amazing privilege to look at it and to look at the grievances and the preamble and all the words that have a real life to them. But that document doesn't make them come alive in terms of the human beings who try to figure out what to do in this moment. And it's that I want us to appreciate, because at least from my perspective, we are living in an extraordinary crisis where I personally look at the news every day and I'm bombarded and bombarded and bombarded and bombarded with crisis and crisis and crisis. And so the question I can ask myself is, how am I handling the crisis in which I live? And I can hopefully learn something by looking at these men and look at how they tried to handle the crisis in which they lived. That crisis was severe. And again, it came from so many different angles that are not articulated in the Declaration itself. You don't see them in the Declaration. You only see them when you look at all the other things they had to do. And the work, it was building and building, building. So in 1775, there were 56 committees in the Continental Congress. In 1776, there were 233 committees in the Continental Congress, for instance, just to do the work and to try to figure things out. And if you look at the state constitutions, mistakes were made there and they had to revise them constantly. The Declaration of Independence is not revised, but it's not the clearest document, right? We look at those words and we hope they've been given all kinds of meaning that Thomas Jefferson never intended, including, sorry, I'm going to point to you, women being created equal, right? He did not intend that, but those words have had a life to them that are really, really important in American history. But I think that is one thing, but it's how do you respond? How do you meet a moment? How do you grapple with all the different pressures and crises that you're living through in May and June, July in 1776? I think that is something else that also carries forward into more of American history and certainly into my life right now, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So now I just want to capture that atmosphere. And now I'll answer any questions you may have, and I'll do my best. And I hope I'm on time. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
we have
right.
microphone. So one of the questions I have is, what was the influence of the Caribbean countries? Because that was a major profit source for England. And I never, growing up with American history, that never was something that really entered my mind until recently. And how much did that help us in our victory, if you will? Because they also were England was also very concerned about the Caribbean.
Okay, now you've answered your own question. You did that very well. So there are some wonderful books now about the global American Revolution and how it appeared in different places and different times. So I remember some of you have traveled, been to St. Eustatius. That was where the guns came from, where the Dutch sent the guns to St. Eustatius and the rebels sent their ships down there to collect the guns and bring them back. For instance, Caribbean was very important. It becomes very important in the scale of the war, obviously, because the British are protecting the places there from slave rebellion and from French incursion, and they put a lot of the Navy there instead of along the coast. And the French Navy comes and beats the British Navy to Yorktown. And that's obviously where it was a decisive battle toward the end of the war. Although, if you look, and if you take this globally, when the French enter the war in 1778, it becomes a global war. So the last battles of the American Revolution or the War of American Independence were not fought anywhere near North America. They were actually fought in India, where the British and the French fought in India. And those were the last battles. So that's why the Caribbean becomes important. If you look at Spain enters the war as well, and the Spain do a massive military campaign from Alabama to Florida, and it also diverts British resources, and the British start fighting a global war against multiple adversaries. It becomes very, very overwhelming for them, and they fail. I mean, the other thing that's really interesting, by the way, if you look at British versions of what the British were dealing with at this time, they were just overwhelmed and incompetent. I mean, as tyrants, they were not the best tyrants in the world, because they were just they were so divided in the government. They were divided among military personnel. They were divided in strategy. They were divided in what they were doing. And they were also overwhelmed. They were responding to so many things at once, and it became untenable for them by the end of the war. So that was quick. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. No one can say that you're not passionate about this topic.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah.
Well, so you mentioned the Iroquois Confederacy, a nation. To what extent might there have been some influence on their laws on the framing or the shaping of the U.S. Constitution?
Right. So that's carrying the circumstance a little further. There's so much debate about that very, very question about the terms of that influence. And there are people who have sought to look at the records and the archives and try to make an argument for more influence. And there are other people who've done it and said there's less influence. And so that's an unsettled question. I can't settle that question myself. And I'm so immersed right now in 1776 and the Declaration. I'm not immersed. Ask me again in 11 years when I'll do the 250th anniversary of the Constitution. I'll be immersed in the Constitution the same way. But right now, that debate, I think, is still unfolding about how much influence there was about political theory and organizing, decision-making, for instance, are the terms in which this is discussed, for instance, because there are certainly politicians in this part of the world who are very involved in negotiation with Native peoples and watchful of their political systems and their social organization, et cetera, often with racist contempt, but not always with racist contempt, and certainly experience in terms of negotiating. And so this is a question that I don't think has been settled yet.
I'm interested in some of the signers of the Declaration, especially John Witherspoon, who, like myself, was a Presbyterian minister and the only clergyman to sign the Declaration. And his name is memorialized in Princeton, New Jersey, and recently on a street in Louisville, Kentucky. Can you tell us about Witherspoon and some of the other interesting signers of the Declaration?
Oh. I can say something about Witherspoon. Witherspoon was really, so there's intellectual lineages about circulation of ideas and about political theories. And one thing about the British side as well in the equation is that the British public and the British government was also very, very divided at this time period. And the British, so there's John Wilkes, for instance, who was opposing the king and opposing the administration in Britain, and lots of people were in the opposition within Britain itself. So there's discussion about how do you organize in the Enlightenment in France and in Britain and in this part of the world, how do you organize government and its relationship to a public? What does that look like? What is the most effective way to do that? And the British, of course, thought they'd found the secret, right? The French did it in this distorted way. They have a monarch that's too strong and makes really bad decisions and accumulates a lot of wealth. And in Britain, they found it a much more balanced way. And they thought this was the most free organization of a government to balance the lords and the commons and the monarchy, and to have a constitutional monarchy where Parliament has a lot of leverage. And so John Witherspoon was really, really important for bringing some of that discussion to this part of the world and bringing it to Princeton University, where people like James Madison studied, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lineages of intellectual influence in terms of figuring out these high-minded questions of governance. This also happens at the street level, because one thing that happens in 1774 is that they organize local committees. We know about this, you know about the Stamp Act, right? And the protests against the Stamp Act. There were very few of those. They didn't last very long. But in 1774, they said, we're not just going to have people protesting in the major cities and not being organized. We're going to try to have local committees in every single town, every single county, everywhere in the rebellious colonies. And that is another kind of political education that happens not from the top down in terms of ideas, but in terms of practices, where you have people who've never been involved in politics, have never been part of figuring out a relationship. Suddenly our community are thrust in circumstances where they're making major decisions about who's right and who's wrong in the community and how justice is going to be issued, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the John Witherspoon level is really important here, and I think the local committee level and on the ground, and all the people who've never been mobilized before are really important here. There are so many other signers. I'll just mention one signer, which is also from New Jersey. Richard Stockton is actually captured by the British later on, and he says, I signed the Declaration, but I don't agree with it at all. And he was under pressure, right? He was devoted in all kinds of ways, but and this is what happened with when the British Army marched through places and the rebel army marched through places, they would ask people to sign oaths of allegiance to the Continental Congress or the king, and we have some of those oaths of allegiances now, and you're a bill, and so I have an oath of allegiance that you signed, saying, I love the king. King George III is my favorite human being ever, because the British Army was saying, would you sign this document? And then 3 weeks later, the rebel army came through and they said, Bill, would you sign this document? You say the Continental Congress is the most lovely group of people that ever lived, and Bill signed that document too. So he signed both. Sorry, Bill, I'm not sure what you did. All right. But right, this is, again, what Richard Stockton was under the most pressure to recant. He was the one signer who recanted his signing of the Declaration of Independence. So I find him very interesting. But the pressure in which that happened was not pleasant. And Bill can attest to that.
So what do you think of people who argue, for example, who use the Declaration of Independence and the sequestration of troops to argue about the National Guard being posted to cities in the United States?
So I would just say that it's really interesting. There's a really lovely new book by Robert Parkinson about the grievances, and he takes John Lind. I didn't know this, but I liked the John Lind before I read this book, but he looks at all the grievances and he breaks them down one by one. What were the grievances actually about? Because some of them are pretty confused. They're not very clear what they're referring to, what's happening out there. We can think of, oh, this refers to the Stamp Act maybe, but Jefferson is invoking all of these other things that people didn't really know what he was talking about. And so there are grievances that are there. And for a long time, again, they were not part of American public discourse until very recently. And now there's become a lot of interest in a number of the grievances, and they feel like the grievances have become more alive. And it's not just the preamble that's very much alive, it's the grievances that are very much alive. So I won't talk about specific grievances, but there's much more discussion about the grievances now.
So fighting a war is real expensive. So can you talk about raising revenue and the role that individual states played and the role that the Continental Congress played? Because when I read accounts of 1776 and the subsequent years, it seemed like the troops were always short of supplies and ammunition.
Yeah, so how are we gonna do this? So this is one of the debates actually that happens in this moment, in the summer, which is they want to form a more durable army because people are enlisting, right? The first enlistments were very, very short. It was just like the British are taking over Boston. They're doing very unpleasant things. Let's just mobilize. And it doesn't last very long and people start dissipating. George Washington is very, very upset when he becomes the general of the Continental Army. And he says, what the heck is going on here? Because these people don't know what the heck they're doing and they're just leaving. And so by the time there's 18,000 of them outside Boston, by the time they get to New York to defend New York, there's so few. And by the time Thomas Paine is writing, there are like 3,000. So how do you solve the problem? And this becomes one of the debates. So do you say, we have to figure out Pennsylvania has this many people and therefore they should supply this many soldiers? And how do we figure out how many people Pennsylvania has? There's no census at this moment, right? They don't even know what's called biopolitics. What are the number of people that are available to do these different things? Or do we say that each state should provide equal shares because all the states are equal and we have equal voting for these issues and we should have equal for this? And so this becomes a debate. How do you apportion a responsibility for an effort? And how do you get the money? Because they start issuing, this is another thing that happens, they start issuing money and that money loses value very quickly. It's like, I was just reading about money in Venezuela, Argentina peso has just crumbled in the last couple of years. Right, it's gone from here all the way down to here. And this is what happens to the continental dollars that are issued. There's another interesting new book now about that the issue was not taxes, it was actually the currency. It was not the Stamp Act and imposition of taxes earlier, it was Currency Act. How do you pay for something? What is money? Right, what is money? So I don't know how many of you are paid in cryptocurrency. Right, is that money? Right, this is one of our debates. What is money? And this is what for them was, and this is what the British said, you're creating money in the colonies that is meaningless. So we're not accepting that money. We want real money, which is our money, not your money. And so what is money becomes one of the big debates in this time period, and it remains a crisis in terms of how do you pay for a scale of supplying a military operation on a scale that had never been done before, geographically, numerically, et cetera, how do you do that? And those debates happen for years in Congress to try to figure it out, and they're always behind the curve, right? The need is here, and they're here always throughout the war. And Ken Burns does this very well, I think, in his documentary, that they're always behind.
Time for just one more quick question, one quick
Sure.
answer too.
Do my best, sorry.
You've mentioned a number of books that you've read or recommend. Do
Yeah.
you have a listing of that somewhere? Because I just don't want to go into a library and choose a.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of awful things right now. But I can make a list and I can try to submit it to Jeff is that okay? Because there are some really lovely books. The Monroe County Public Library, I don't know what you think of it, but it's been a godsend since my kids were really small. I've spent so many times there. I still go there once a week. And they have lots of new books that are really, really fantastic, thoughtful new books. People have done, again, research, archival research, have delved in the archives for months and months and months to do this work. And that's real history, and that's what I'm a little bit passionate about. As you said, thank you. Thank you.
Konstantin, thank you so much for your talk. And I just realized I should have brought my husband. He would have been pounding you with questions forever. It was so interesting. In honor of your talk, we will be giving a donation of $100 to the CJAM for the quarter. And I'd also like to thank today all of our volunteers who helped out. Peggy Frisbee for greeting, Lynn Schwartzberg for the pseudo introduction of guests, Jeff Richardson for introducing our speaker, Leslie Kutsinko for the Zoom host, Michelle Cohen for stepping up for reflection, Judy Schroeder for doing the reporting, Michael Shermis, as always, for the mic and camera operator. We're going to have to get some other people here to help you. And Michelle doing double duty, also being photographer for us, Jill as our executive assistant, and then Tyler, as always, for our audio equipment. And I'm never going to complain about the 12 to 14 committees that we have after hearing 233. I'll just say our next meeting will be in the Stateroom East on August 18th. Denzel Ross will be our special guest discussing leading with innovation through healthcare uncertainty. Please join us. That probably is one of the crises that keeps you awake every day. And by the way, one other thing I thought about today is Canada is another state. What a thought. Just saying. And with that, Tyler, if you could put up the four-way test, and for those who are able, please stand. Of the things we think, say, or do, first, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun?